Hi, everyone. My name is Najla, and huge thank you for joining us today. We're going to have a discussion called Measuring the AI Impact on Developer Experience. And this is a lead dev online panel discussion created in partnership with GitKraken. Today's discussion will last around 45 minutes, after which both the panelists and myself will head over to the lead dev Slack to answer some of your questions in the panel Q&A channel. We may have time to answer a couple of questions live, so please do submit those through the Q&A feature on Zoom. I'll be monitoring it, and we'll get to them if we can towards the end. Otherwise, we'll definitely collect those and talk about them in Slack. So first, let's get started with some introductions. My name is Najla El-Mashtoub, like I mentioned earlier, and today I'll be joined by our amazing panelists to share their experiences and insights. So I'll ask you each to introduce yourselves. Just starting with myself, I am currently a freelancer living in Berlin, Germany. I'm a director of engineering at Align, where we work with startups to help them grow their businesses. I'm also a coach, a leadership coach working independently here with clients all over the tech space. So let's start with Nathan.
Right. Hi. Thank you so much. It's great to see everyone. My name is Nathan Harvey. I lead up the Dora program here with Google Cloud. If you're unfamiliar with Dora, the quick 30-second thing on it is it is research into how do technology-driven teams and technology organizations thrive. Dora wants to help teams get better at getting better.
Great. Thank you, Nathan.
Of course.
Jeremy, tell me about you.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. I'm Jeremy Castile. So I'm VP of Developer Research here at GitKraken. GitKraken is a developer experience platform. So we help developers be more productive. We help engineering leaders get visibility into things like velocity, code quality, AI impact, which we're going to be chatting about today. I'm super excited about. So I've been at GitKraken for the last 3 years. And before that, I led teams at Docker and New Relic. So I've been in the DevOps and dev tooling space for quite some time. Excited for the conversation today.
Thank you. And last but not least, Bill.
Hey everybody, I am Bill Harding. I've been programming since I was a teenager, which was a while ago now. In the last 5 years, have been really passionate about instrumenting developer metrics, helping teams understand what it is they're working on, and in particular, understanding how the new tools that are coming available with these various AI agents are measurably changing the outcomes that teams observe. So we've been really active in publishing research over the last few years, in particular our AI code quality research, which has been downloaded many times. And yeah, we're just continuing to use all of our data to inform better understanding of how teams can get the most from their AI tactics.
Great. Thank you. I'm so excited to do this panel with you three specifically. Most of us in tech have been given these mandates that we must adopt AI internally in order to boost engineering proficiency and productivity. And now we're living with the consequences of all of the decisions that we made. Some are good, some are bad. Teams have taken very different approaches, but all of us are learning in real time, which I think just makes it really good to talk through. So in this panel, I really want to talk about what's working, what isn't, and how we can evolve together a bit more intentionally. And I want to start with Nathan. As engineering leaders, how are we getting real feedback from the engineers that are using the AI tools day to day?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. Thanks, Najla. So one of the things that Dora has done this year is we published the 2025 State of AI-Assisted Software Development. So I'll be sharing some of the findings that we have there. When it comes to how our engineers are, or sorry, how leaders are getting feedback from engineers, I think there's a couple of different ways that leaders are getting that feedback. First, and probably most used, is sort of telemetry data out of these systems. One of the challenges, though, with that telemetry data is a lot of that telemetry data is focused on things like adoption. For example, if you use an AI agent or an AI assisted or AI assistant, and it's generating code for you, a leader might ask, well, how many lines of code were generated by AI? Or what is our code acceptance rate? Which is a measure of, the AI makes a suggestion and the engineer makes a choice to accept that code. Like, how often does that happen? These are good metrics, but it's really important to remember that what these are signaling is adoption of the tools. It's not necessarily a measure of productivity. Am I a more productive engineer because I accepted more lines from AI? I don't know. I think we have to think about different sort of measures of productivity. And maybe we'll talk about some of those as we go through today. But telemetry is just one way, I think, that leaders are getting these signals. The other way that leaders can get signals from developers on how these tools are going and how they're changing the way that people are working is through things like surveys or even just talking to engineers. It's weird. You can learn a lot by just having a conversation with somebody. And I think these things are really important because a lot can get missed or is invisible when we look only at system data. So I think it's always a good idea to mix sort of experience reports, whether those are through surveys or through going and observing the work or just talking to engineers, together with telemetry that we get out of systems.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I invite anybody else to jump in if they have a thought. Otherwise, Jeremy, because of your role, I would really love to understand a bit more about how you're seeing AI mandates play out actually on the ground, especially given what Nathan just said about getting signal. What patterns are you seeing and how organizations are approaching this moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have spent the last year talking to probably hundreds of engineering teams. And so, obviously there's a spectrum of, how teams are rolling this out, but we have absolutely seen this both in terms of kind of the tops down mandates, where engineering leaders are getting these mandates to roll out AI across their teams for sure. But we also see like bottoms up developer adoption, right? And I think the engineering leaders are kind of stuck in that middle area of like, man, this stuff is coming in fast, and trying to figure out, how do we make sense of all this? And so, yeah, absolutely. I think to Nathan's point, teams are trying to figure out like what are all the different layers of kind of the different types of measurement that we need. And what does productivity actually mean, right? It's, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, we used to talk about lines of code. It doesn't work in the kind of this new AI era that we're in. And so, obviously we're going to talk about this, today in this webinar, but developer experience is huge. Getting metrics out of these systems and really being able to kind of like tie all of that together right now is the huge task that's in front of a lot of these engineering teams.
Yeah,
I would
thank
also
you.
say, I would also say from a mandate perspective, I'm seeing a lot of really interesting things happening. One organization I was talking with, they're a relatively small organization, but they're very technology forward, very much leaning into AI, and their leadership came out and said, look, as you're using the AI, it should make you twice as productive. And it very intentionally, that leadership did not define what does twice as productive mean? How are you going to get there? They kind of left that to the individual. And really, it was kind of this idea that we wanted to sort of inspire everyone to think like, look, maybe this is helping me a little bit, but if I don't feel twice as productive, I should probably lean in more and learn more from how to use these tools. And I think that's really, really important. Of course, that organization, in maybe not a surprise, certainly not a surprise to probably this panel, there were people in that organization who said, uh-oh, what if I don't hit that 2x? Are there going to be negative consequences for me? And so that leadership was very quick to sort of clarify and say, no, look, this is we're sort of setting this as an aspirational thing, and to give you a good signal, have you leaned in enough or not yet? And then from a research perspective, one of the things that we published as part of this year's report with Dora is what we call the Dora AI capabilities model. Because what we're seeing is that everyone is using AI. Everyone in our survey and that we're talking to is using AI, but we're seeing high levels of variance in terms of team performance across different organizations. So we wanted to understand what conditions and capabilities really help the adoption of AI amplify the impacts of that AI. And one of those things was a clear and communicated stance. And what we found, and so this goes right back to that mandate. Like having a mandate is not a bad thing. When you have a clear and communicated stance on what is expected in terms of AI adoption, we see that AI's positive influence on individual effectiveness gets amplified. We see that organizational performance gets amplified. We see that the neutral effect that AI is having on friction within an organization starts to decrease. So we're decreasing friction when we have that clear and communicated stance. And we also see that AI's positive influence on software delivery performance also gets amplified. So it's really important to have that clear and communicated stance. It's one of probably the earliest foundational things that an organization should look at.
Yeah, it seems like an essential part of getting a team to really maximize its AI potential is setting those goals or choosing those metrics that Nathan's alluding to, and then making sure that the team understands that measuring the experience they're having as they use it, measuring their sentiment on how well this is working for them, that affirms for the developers that this isn't just about getting tools that are going to replace the developers. It's about creating the right combination of tools that are available to developers to help them, especially on tasks that they didn't want to do anyways. And when the developers feel that the manager is participating in iterating towards AI future that maximizes the well-being of the developers themselves, it's a lot easier to make that mandate into something that actually ends up having a positive outcome, because the developers are going to be invested if they feel like you are measuring and understanding how they feel as they try to use the tools that are available to them.
Mm. So Bill, if you can expand a little bit, what specifically are you measuring like on your teams, and how, if at all, are you tying all of that back to business impact, just to like kind of button up the whole picture?
Yeah. Well, I think that if there was just one takeaway that I would hope people would leave this webinar with, it is to have a conversation on the team about what are the 3 to 5 metrics that you think for your circumstances define the desirable outcomes that you want to happen as you adopt AI. And I think that productivity-based metrics are going to be a subset of the 3 to 5 metrics that you choose. But there should also be, and it doesn't have to just be 5, it can certainly, and I think often is more, but I think at a minimum, you want to agree on a core set of metrics. And I think that those core set of metrics ought to have a velocity component, they ought to have a code quality component, and they absolutely need to have a developer experience or a developer sentiment component, so that you have a holistic understanding of not only are these tools helping us get more done in the way that we collectively recognize as progress getting things done, but are they also not sabotaging our long-term health, which a lot of code quality metrics can get into, and are they making developers happier to come to their job every day? And so I think that the specific measurements that get used for that are highly variable, because it depends both on the nature of the product that's being built, a web app that deploys every day and where a critical defect often gets fixed in a couple hours is going to have much different priorities than a critical infrastructure app that maybe releases every month. And if it has a critical defect, that's, stop the production line. We all have to come in and pay attention to this. So I think there is a lot of variety on that front. I think there's also a lot of variety depending on the role of who is spearheading the effort to let the teams get the most value out of their AI tooling. I think that a CTO is going to be interested naturally in different metrics than a lead developer or an individual contributor. But I think that's all the more reason that having the conversation with all these people who can start by agreeing, okay, these are the 3 to 5 things that we all agree we can use as a point of truth when we're comparing what's almost certainly going to be a variety of different approaches that get taken across many teams. If you're working in a big company, you're going to have every team as sort of a natural petri dish of different tools that they're trying and different IDEs that they're trying. And to be able to use those different teams as data to figure out what the ideal combination of AI and tools are, that is why it's very valuable to have those agreed upon metrics so you can figure out who is having the best results and how can we emulate that across the organization. How can we give developers as much information as possible about what has been working for their teammates? And so I think some of the specific metrics are things like story points completed, diff delta on commits, pull requests closed. There's several others. I might list some more in some of the later questions, but there is a wide variety that we see customers come to us with on GitClear, which has led us to build about 70 different metrics at this point. And when a new customer signs up, it can be a little bit overwhelming almost. And I feel bad for them, but it's really a product of just how diverse the different circumstances are that customers are starting from, that you need a lot of different options. And you want to allow the teams to understand these options as well as possible, pick the ones that apply to them best, and let their teams experiment and then share what is working best among those experiments.
Yeah, and one thing I would quickly add to that as well is like, at least from, our experience out chatting with teams, like, I would encourage teams to feel like if you're just getting started on this, that's okay. Like, you don't have to feel like you're way behind. And so there are so many, changing things, new tools popping up all the time. And so, just start, I think, is probably the key takeaway there. And it's okay if you are just getting started on some of the stuff. And there's great resources out there. Nathan mentioned, right? Like the Dora research, there's tremendous value in that report. Go check it out. But yeah, the important thing is, just get started, keep it simple. And it's okay if you are just getting started.
I want to take a question from the audience that is really relevant here. How can we avoid setting up metrics that aren't really going to be meaningful?
Oh, this is a fun one, I think. And it's a really great question. So thanks, Beth, for asking that. I have some bad news. You can't. Like you can't fully, like, I can't give you advice that will help you 100% avoid setting up metrics that aren't going to provide value for you or aren't going to give you meaningful insights. Just the fact that you're asking the question gives good hope. Like you're probably on the right path already if you're already thinking about this. But I do think some of the things that are really important is to get very clear on what outcomes you're expecting. Why are you measuring these things? In fact, in the report, in the Dora report, we talk a little bit about metrics frameworks and what are some of the considerations that you might have as you think about metrics frameworks. We oftentimes, maybe we're thinking about, we want to improve developer productivity. So let's make sure that we define that. But maybe it's product excellence, or maybe it's organizational effectiveness, or just developer experience. Like all of these things are very different. Now, they're certainly overlapping. Like it looks like a Venn diagram if you take those three things into consideration. And I think I guess there's two pieces of advice that I will give that are concrete pieces of advice. The first is that it is important, once you've decided on some metrics, that you capture a baseline, because you're not going to know how much AI has changed that metric if you don't know what it was before you brought AI in. And along with that piece of advice, you have to realize that simply adding AI to the mix, like we work in complex organizations with tons of emergent behavior, and you can't just change one thing in your organization like that. It's impossible to do. That change is going to have ripple effects and so forth. So you have to have some understanding that, yes, maybe this was what it looked like before AI. This is what it looks like now after AI. AI may have had some thing to do with that change. It may not have. So you're probably going to want to dig deeper. And then the other thing that, like, the test that I always use when we're thinking about metrics, like the reason to have metrics, as Bill kind of pointed out there, is to have a conversation. And that conversation is going to lead to changing something that we do. So if you look at a metric, I like to ask, what behavior would we change if that number doubled? Or if that number was cut in half? What would we do differently? And if you can't answer that question, that's a pretty strong signal that the metric actually isn't driving any behavior, isn't driving any change within your organization. So that's probably not a good one.
Yeah, the other thing I would add to that is just really quickly is, from the teams that we've been talking to, the way that they're starting to think about this is almost like every metric is an AI impact metric, because as they're rolling out these tools, they want to not only measure, yes, usage, adoption, and these types of things, but what's happening within the code base. And so being able to bring those things together has been like tremendously important for the teams that we've been talking to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's why when you can find the metrics that are as close as possible to what uh, results as the product growing and the product being more adopted, I think those tend to be metrics around the issues that we're closing. Are they valuable issues that we're closing? Are they issues that are not resulting in a cascade of bugs that follow after we close the issues? I think that that issue tracker surface is a rich starting point for a lot of the outcome-based metrics that one could consider. But there are certainly, I think, a set of metrics that tend to be especially indicative of what's happening on an AI team. And I think those are things like the amount of time spent reviewing code. That's something that is very prone to evolve as different code generation practices are used in the organization. If you see that you're writing twice as much code, but you're spending 4 times more hours reviewing that code, that's telling you something that you probably might want to incorporate into the process of preparing a pull request before it gets posted. Release cadence, I think, is another metric that's pretty close to the truth of how rapidly your product is actually releasing and improving. And I know Dora has been tracking this for years and years and giving us great benchmarks that we can use to see how our own team's performance compares to the industry. So those are a couple of the areas that I think have often proven especially useful for teams that are looking at their AI usage through the lens of what are the hard data outcomes that we can measure when we're using system A versus B versus C.
Hope you're enjoying this video, but did you know LeadDev has lots more to offer?
So webinar, podcasts, I even like articles, conferences, events, and most importantly, community.
And even thinking about like process, tech, and people, which is how LeadDev website is laid out, I really think this is the #1 learning platform for me as an engineering manager.
Don't forget to check out leaddev.com.
Thank you. There's a lot of questions about metrics, so I want to, like, maybe if you guys want to answer them like a little rapid fire, we can just throw them in, because I think they're really interesting, and I really appreciate the audience getting them in. One is, can you suggest, based on your interviews with companies, the top qualitative outcome-based metrics? I think we talked a lot about quantitative metrics and started talking about, surveys and things like that, but maybe someone can summarize, like, well, what is the intention when we collect qualitative metrics, and what behavior does that shift? Just to think about, like, Nathan's terminology here.
Yeah, one of the qualitative, or maybe two, that I'll just mention really quickly that Dora looks into are friction and burnout. So how much friction are you experiencing throughout your day? And in our survey, we actually don't define friction. We kind of leave that to the survey participant to understand what that means. And that's it is a good qualitative measure. Friction when you see it. Like, I can't get something done because I'm waiting on something else, or because this process is onerous. And so that, I think, is really important. And then burnout. Bill was talking earlier about we have to think about the well-being or the developer experience of the people on our team. And so, again, trying to understand burnout, maybe through something like, are you cynical? Do you have cynicism while you're at work? Are you able to separate your work life from your home life, or do you carry your work with you all the time? These are all signals of burnout that you want to watch out for.
Yeah, and I would just throw in, I think from our perspective, developer experience is a core part of who GitKraken is. We're a, dev tools company. And so this component is massive. So we think about measurements across all the different systems, but really at the center of that is developer experience. So even if all the metrics maybe look great, you really need to make sure that you're pulling in survey type data from developers to understand the sentiment. How are they feeling about how things are going? And you need to be able to correlate that across all the other metrics, right? And so that's huge, especially for engineering leaders. I mean, you think about all the things that a good developer experience, all the outcomes that you want, things like retention and, burnout, like Nathan mentioned. It's so core to make sure that you're collecting that data as well.
Thank you. Someone is asking, what is your take about choosing a simple but flawed single metric? And the example they gave is number of open PRs.
All right. I think that every metric is flawed. Like, every metric is a proxy for something else. So they're all flawed. We just have to embrace that and understand, as the saying goes, like, all models are flawed, some are useful. The same is true about metrics. And then I think to be very, very clear, I don't think any of us, I might be wrong, so correct me if I am, but I don't think any of us would argue for a single metric. You have to have what they call in the space paper a constellation of metrics that you're looking at. There has to be a few things that you're looking at so that you can get sort of different views on the problem that you're trying to address, or the thing you're trying to measure.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I think of it like a car dashboard, right? We wouldn't just look at the speedometer. We want to know, oil temperature, pressure, and these types of things. We need the complete full picture. And I think that's sort of what we're saying here is not just one single metric or even one category of metrics, right? You need code quality, developer experience, AI impact, productivity. You need to be able to see all of those things.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of wanting to have propulsive metrics that are measuring how rapidly you're moving forward, how rapidly you're authoring durable code that gets shipped to production, and you're measuring that relative to the stability based metrics. How much duplication are you introducing as you rapidly deploy and rapidly release code? If you're closing twice as many issues as you did last year, but that's because you're copy pasting files all over the place that nobody's going to be able to ultimately manage. Just one of those metrics does not tell the valuable story that your team needs to know to make the right decisions as a long-term product. I think it has to be propulsive, augmented by stability and quality. And so that's why we are shifty in trying to just give one answer to the question, because any one answer has to be connected to 2 or 3 other metrics that help to flesh out the other side of, in the case of like open pull requests, you could have questions around like, do some open pull requests get abandoned? Do some open pull requests take so long to review that they ultimately end up being ROI negative? Like, there's just always going to be but alsos for any given metric, which is why picking 3 to 5 of them is something that I think is sort of a minimum required objective for teams that want to get a more holistic understanding of which of their teams are doing the best job of using the tools available.
All right, great. I know everybody loves metrics. There's a few more questions in the chat about this, but some of them are really specific. So I would love to bring those to Slack after the call, and you can get these guys to answer more specifically, which will be great. I'm curious to I'm curious to hear from Jeremy, beside just writing code, where in this whole software development lifecycle do you think that AI can genuinely help? And are we identifying the right bottlenecks, or are we leaving something on the table?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this question. This is like really at the core of what what we've been building with GitKraken Insights. So like, the dev teams have had their AI tools, for a number of years now, and that's been amazing. But what we're seeing now is something like GitKraken Insights. Now we're getting into the AI tools for engineering leaders, which is awesome, right? In terms of getting visibility into all these things, using AI to help us summarize some of these metrics and make executive ready kind of, decision making and reporting and things like that. So it's very exciting. We see tools being deployed across the full SDLC. So certainly within the planning space, whether it's, Jira or something else, there's tremendous innovation there. Obviously, within the coding and development space, we've seen those tools for, quite some time, and even into, the CI/CD and deployment space, right? And just even things like, seeing teams get really innovative with different MCP tools. And now we're getting into this like agentic workflow era. So there's no end of like where things are going for sure. I think like AI coding assistance was really just the tip of the iceberg. So we're really excited about this for sure.
Great. Bill, I want to hear about when teams are, they're both testing out different AI tools. They might have different results. Especially as a leader, I want to understand how you're comparing, understanding the ROI. And there was also a question from the audience that's related to this. Yeah, around how to justify that the AI tool is worth the investment that was made. So
Yeah.
maybe give us some examples there.
Yeah. So, yeah, the starting point, I think, for understanding whether AI investment is going to be worth it is having your conversation about what metrics within your company define your success. So again, I think a lot of companies' success is defined by, are we shipping the highest value issues that are in our Jira, that basically our product people decided as the most important? Are we shipping those, and are we happy while we do it? I think that is, the essence of what you're trying to iterate towards. And I think that the best way to do that after you've chosen your 5 metrics, which, get clear customers, if I'm just going to pick 5 that I very commonly see them key in on, story points completed per sprint is a really common one. Or if they don't use story points, just the overall number of issues closed per sprint is usually something that they pay a lot of attention to. The rate of durable code change, diff delta, is how that gets measured on GitClear. There's other ways to measure that. The release cadence that I had alluded to earlier, time spent reviewing code, and the amount of code that's copy pasted or duplicated, I think are all ideas that a lot of people evaluating AI teams will find value in considering. But ultimately, I think you want to give teams the flexibility to make their own decisions about what tools seem most promising to them, and you want to let them go forth and use those tools and see what the outcomes will be. And as long as you have a developer analytics tool or a configuration with Claude Code potentially that lets you see on a team-by-team basis how the metrics that you deemed most relevant are comparing on a per developer basis per team, then you can start getting the truth about, was the team that adopted Claude Code the one that had a spike in the issues that were closed while having no increase in the time to review those issues once they adopted Claude Claude in maybe September? Was Team B that chose instead to go with Cursor and to use multiple agents? Are they opening fewer pull requests, but getting more high impact tickets closed because they made better decisions about what to work on and they got those things done quickly? So I love to give teams the flexibility to experiment. I think that is a piece of what makes those developer sentiment evaluations end up being more positive, is when the developers feel like they have a voice in how this AI adoption is happening, and when they have suggestions from other people about where AI is making the greatest positive difference, which oftentimes is in writing code or in writing test code. In the examples that I've seen, since that test code is a specific area that a lot of developers aren't enthusiastic about, but is very important to the long-term health of a repo. So having a dashboard of metrics that lets you see on a team-by-team basis how outcomes are changing per team over time as they adopt different tools, I think that is the sort of entry point that a VP or a CTO or even a lead developer can utilize to start understanding, are there approaches that over time are consistently ranking higher in the metrics that we collectively decided are the ones that are important to our circumstances? And if so, can we present that information to the teams that aren't yet adopting those recommendations and see if their performance changes when they do follow the practices that the teams that that have had the best results have tried? And so I think it should always be experimentations that are being evaluated based on the data that they generate, both code quality, productivity, developer happiness, and then those experiments should be promoted and celebrated and repeated as the team continues to experiment with what's inevitably going to be a new, better agent that is offered next month, and causes everybody to completely change their IDE and everything about their developer experience again. So it's definitely a moving target, which is another reason why I think having a constant idea of which metrics are important to your team helps you know whether you are continuing to make progress towards that moving target.
I think one of the things that you touched on there, Bill, that is really important is that it isn't necessarily the tool the tool in and of itself that's causing those metrics to change. It's the other practices that you've built up around them. And so I think it's a failure mode that I've seen is like, hey, we've distributed 3 different tools to 3 different teams. Whichever team is doing best, we're just going to align on that tool. It's probably not the tool, but rather the practices, whether that's they're being very intentional about how they're doing it. And so what I'm seeing the most successful organizations doing is sort of building communities of practice and communities of learning around what are the good practices. And that might look like things like hackathons that are happening. You mentioned a Claude.md file. Like that Claude.md file helps set up some guardrails for how the agent is going to behave. Are you setting up similar guardrails for other tools? And how do we start sharing those guardrails? How do we share better context? I think there's a lot of stuff that goes into enablement and really building that adoption. The other thing that we've seen is that there's a lot of there's always a question of trust. How much do you trust the output of the AI? And the reality is, like, adoption feeds trust. So the more you use a thing, the more likely you are to trust it. And the more you trust it, the more likely you are to use it, right? It becomes a nice virtuous cycle. But this is also a pointer for leaders that we've got to give time and space for teams to go learn and experiment and play with these things so that they can start building that trust and understanding, hey, this works really well when I use it like this. And maybe not so well when I use it like that, and share those lessons across the organization, because many of those lessons are going to transcend which tool you're using. And it's more so how you're using the tools than it is which tool you're using.
Yeah, and one other quick thing I would add there too is just kind of tying it back to the business outcomes. So we've been spending a lot of time with teams, and sort of how we've been helping them is being able to, first of all, is being able to get these metrics, right, as kind of the baseline. And now how do you translate that as an engineering leader back to, business outcomes that, the business will care about. And so where we've been helping them is just, even just taking simple examples. Some of the teams that we work with will have like a kind of a simple value calculator. And it's like, yes, sure, maybe we're paying, 40 or 50 bucks per developer, for some of these AI coding assistant tools, but we are seeing, $2,000 per developer in productivity gains monthly, right? And so these are the types of things that they're able to translate and, through faster velocity and healthier code, translating those back into the business that, helps the business understand, the value of these AI tools.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question to wrap it up. I'm kind of torn. I actually really want to take this audience question that's related to what you're talking about. How can you try to decouple the effects of AI from everything else that's happening in the company? For example, major refactorings, hypergrowth, etc. And I think this is a general like evergreen question for experimentation, but I'm really curious how you're talking about attribution for AI tooling.
I mean, I think the first option is to just let the natural experiment of different teams use AI, different amounts, factor into your evaluation. Almost all the modern developer analytics tools allow you to understand how much a team is using AI. And so you'll be able to see which teams are maybe not using AI or using AI very little. And it's not uncommon that those teams can have great outcomes. And so that is one starting point that you can use, is just if you have multiple teams in your company and some of those teams aren't using AI, but yet they're still producing durable code change at a rate on par per developer with the teams that are using AI every day, that is telling you something about what the real bottom line output or outcome of the tool usage is, or lack thereof, lack of positive output.
Yeah, I think this also kind of points back to this idea that you have to have baseline numbers. You might see PR velocity start to change as you're using more AI, but if you have a baseline and a historical view of that, maybe it's accelerated, but maybe it was already accelerating. So you haven't actually changed the trajectory of that by introducing AI. But I think a really fun, and to every engineer that is listening to this, I'm sorry, but a really fun experiment you could run is forbid the use of AI for the next iteration from a team and see how that changes, both how they feel about the work and how things are going. Like, it's very hard to change just one thing, but if we forbid just one thing, maybe we get a closer, tighter signal on what do we actually attribute here back to the use of AI.
That's fun, eh? It's fun to not to have
Fun.
to type the
Sorry,
entire.
sorry, I should have put that in
line.
scare quotes. It's fun. It can be an interesting experiment, and maybe you'll learn. Maybe you'll learn very fast that, instead of this full iteration, 2 days was enough. We need it back.
All right. Thank you all so much for the insights on today's panel. I feel like we could go for 3 hours, but we're gonna head now to the Lead Dev Slack. The channel is called Panel Q&A. So please head there. We'll copy and paste the remaining questions and we'll continue discussion. Thank you so much for joining and see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.